to KOAT Channel 7 for broadcasting this very important debate. It is really an honor to be here. I am running for the U.S. House of Representatives in New Mexico's 1st Congressional District. My name is Janice Arnold-Jones, and I want your vote. Our nation and our state are facing profound problems, and they're getting worse. Our national debt is out of control. Our vital entitlement programs are running out of money. Our economy is floundering under the weight of heartbreaking levels of unemployment. America is losing influence in the world. Iran is on the brink of acquiring nuclear weapons while our own military and national labs are facing disastrous cuts. We must change course. We must do better. Now, my opponent is a career bureaucrat. She has failed to protect our community from violent criminals. She has failed to stand up for seniors and protect them in nursing homes. She has failed to protect our children from childhood diseases. And she failed to uphold the public trust by conducting backroom meetings in violation of the Open Meetings Act. To learn more, go to themichellerecord.com. You know, this election is completely about trust. You've trusted me in Santa Fe. Trust me in Washington.
Michelle Lujan Grisham, your opening statement, please.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I'm Michelle Lujan Grisham, and New Mexico voters are headed to the polls to decide who will stand up for them in Congress. Now, I spent more than 3 decades standing up for New Mexico families. In fact, I started by standing up for seniors and veterans who were abused in nursing homes. And when I couldn't get a single state official with the authority to act to protect them, I went undercover. Now, my father dropped me off at a particularly bad facility, and I was admitted as a totally dependent stroke victim. I was subjected to terrible neglect and humiliation. I witnessed firsthand the despicable treatment of others. It was the longest 3 days of my life. So I publicly exposed those conditions, and as a result, that facility was closed down. I led the efforts to clean up other facilities and change state law. Today, New Mexico is the only state in the country with undercover care evaluations modeled after the work that we did. I stood up when no one else would. Today, Congress is failing its citizens because it fails to act. Too many New Mexicans are worried about keeping their jobs or even having one, and too many others are going without health care. Our children don't have the same educational opportunities that we once had. As your candidate for Congress, you deserve to know where I stand and what I'll do. I'll be a champion for the middle class. I will fight to put New Mexicans back to work, and I will protect a woman's right to make her own health care decisions. As a widow and single parent, I understand the emotional and financial burdens that New Mexico families face. I'm Michelle Lujan Grisham, and I will stand up for you in Congress.
Now, our first question tonight for the candidates who comes from Action 7 News anchor Shelley Rabendo. Shelley?
Good evening to you both. New Mexico is one of the poorest nations in the country, and with unemployment now at 6.4%, what would you do to help New Mexicans get jobs? And please be specific.
Janice Arnold-Jones, you go first.
Absolutely. The most important thing Congress can do for the 1st Congressional District is to pass a budget. Now, that may sound like a disconnect, but we are a federally dependent economy in the 1st Congressional District. When Congress fails to pass a budget, it means that employees go without paychecks. That is the very first thing that we can do that would make a difference in the state of New Mexico. The next thing that we need to do is we have to pull back regulations at the federal level. When we tie up small businesses in red tape, they cannot create the resources or the opportunities to hire more people. And third, it is time to streamline our tax code. Being able to predict what your burden is going to be allows small businesses to plan better, which allows them to actually expand what we're doing. So those are 3 very important things that would make a difference in Congressional District 1 almost immediately.
Okay, minute 15 for your response.
Thank you. Absolutely, we got to get New Mexicans back to work. The first effort must be for Congress to pass the Jobs Act. Now, this is real money, investing in infrastructure, putting New Mexicans and Americans back to work, building hospitals and schools, working on our roads and bridges. We should be reinvesting in Sandia Labs to do spin-off technology, much like they've done already in the Science and Technology Park, so that we're creating entrepreneurs and doing job creation right here in our community. And as a small business owner, I know that the biggest issue is for small businesses to have access to working capital. Congress should take a leadership role to make sure that we're creating successful private-public partnerships so that we're providing real access to working capital for our small businesses. These collective efforts will create a robust economy, will put New Mexicans back to work, and will give us the outcomes that we're all desiring in this poor economic environment.
All right, Janice, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal should you choose to take it.
Absolutely. The discussion of public-private partnerships literally makes me cringe. It makes me think about Solyndra. In this case, a public-private partnership means the government picking winners and losers. It is time to stop that. If we simplify our tax code, making it simple, fair, and easy to administer, then we create a level playing field where absolutely everybody can participate.
All right, you have 30 seconds as well for a rebuttal.
We have to have public-private partnerships. The notion that Congress should abdicate its responsibility to improve the economy and put people back to work is nonsense. That the county commission, we invested in the expansion of Freedman Recycling and USC Bags, the Lowe's call center. These efforts put hundreds of Mexicans back to work. The bipartisan effort to start the Paseo del Norte interchange. These are real private-public partnerships that make a difference in New Mexico's economy.
All right, our second question tonight comes from the Albuquerque Journal reporter James Monteleone. James, go ahead.
Thanks. President Obama has committed to a U.S. withdrawal of combat troops from Afghanistan by the end of 2014. Do you feel that timeline is reasonable and responsible, and why?
Michelle Lujan-Grisham, you go first. You have 1:15.
Thank you. I absolutely think that timeline is both responsible and reasonable. I mean, it is time that we bring back our American troops, and it's not sustainable over the long haul. Let's not forget that we put both those wars on a credit card. The reality is that we can't, without those troops returning home, respond to other national threats and security interests. Here's what we're doing. We are making sure that we're training the Afghanistan security forces so that they can respond on their own to threats of terrorism and the Al-Qaeda. This is responsible policy, and it's a meaningful effort to do both. Make sure that we return to a national security agenda that's meaningful across the world and bringing our troops home, safely home.
All right, Janice Arnold-Jones, you also have 1:15. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. I am a Navy wife. I am concerned when our government decides to declare when it is we are going to enter or exit anything. Do I think we're on the right track? Absolutely. But if I look at the conflict in Afghanistan, while we have made tremendous advances, I am also watching the area around Afghanistan. The Taliban is growing. Hezbollah is growing. And so if we withdraw too quickly, all of the advances, all of the work that we have gained, all of the liberties that have actually gotten into reach of the people of Afghanistan will go down the drain. This is a very difficult time in terms of foreign policy. And what we need is to make sure that our friends know we will stand with them, that we will be strong, and the folks who would do us harm, that they know that any effort to attack us or to attack our friends is exactly the same thing.
30-second rebuttal opportunity.
Again, without having our troops back at home to respond significantly and expeditiously to any other threats, and the notion that we would just stay in Afghanistan for how long doesn't make any sense. We are following a national security agenda. We are following the military's advice about just exactly when conditions are present that we can bring our troops back, and we should stick to that plan.
You also have a half minute for rebuttal.
To suggest that our national agenda is merely Afghanistan is almost laughable. We have troops that are in the Sinai. We have Syria to deal with. We're not sure who the good guys or the bad guys are. To have a strong response is important. To have a show of force is vital. To suggest that we bring back all of our troops as a national policy agenda, that is absolutely ludicrous.
All right, Action 7 News political reporter Todd Unger has talked to all the candidates this political season. He has our next question. Todd.
Thanks, Doug. There's a growing consensus that one of the reasons our crime rate here in New Mexico seems to keep going up is because of drugs. As you're both aware, New Mexico has few treatment centers and avenue for help. In your mind, is this a family issue, or is there an actual role for government government here. And just in general, we'd like to get your thoughts on how we're doing on the war on drugs.
And the first answer comes from the Republican candidate. Again, a minute 15. Go ahead, please.
I think we're struggling with the war on drugs. And so clearly one of the first steps that we can take to help mitigate the flow, the traffic, is to make sure that we have secure borders. We have really not made that decision, so the trafficking across our borders is still there. And it impacts all of the Rio Grande Valley. It creeps up through the South Valley all the way to the Northeast Heights to Santa Fe. And clearly the saddest story is in Espanola. And so, do I think that government has a role? You bet it has a role. Why we are continuing to provide an avenue and a market for these drugs is probably the toughest of all questions. When I ran for governor, one of the things that spurred me on was in Espanola. The statement repeatedly was, this is now a cultural issue. And that is probably one of the toughest places to be. So dealing with this as a family issue, as a community issue, is probably our best prospect.
Minute 15 for your response.
Thank you. You know, as a county commissioner and the Secretary of Health, I can tell you of all the tragic stories by families who are looking for treatment and support, including today in Albuquerque or Bernalillo County, access to adolescent treatment centers. This is an issue where government has to provide meaningful access for substance abuse and treatment. While I agree that we want to definitely do something about slowing or diminishing altogether the flow of illicit drugs into our communities, we have to be responsible and responsive to meeting a growing need. As a county commissioner, one of my last efforts was to make sure that we were investing and building in a brand new adolescent treatment center to address this very real issue in Bernalillo County.
30-second rebuttal. Janice Arnold.
I don't have a rebuttal.
Okay, Ms. Lujan-Grisham, you'd like to
Well,
add something?
I want to really focus on that. I mean, in this county, we now have one of the highest heroin drug problems in the state. We're seeing increases in all of our substance abuse. We're continuing to see that illicit drugs isn't really, to some degree, the issue here. We have one of the highest prescription drug addiction rates in the country. We have to provide behavioral health programs if we're going to make a meaningful difference here.
Okay, our next question in this debate comes from Action 7 News anchor Shelley Rabando. Shelley?
Do you support or oppose gay marriage? And if you oppose it, would you be in favor of a civil union that would allow same-sex couples the same financial benefits as heterosexual couples, such as Social Security, other financial benefits, medical benefits?
Michelle, you go first, a minute 15.
Marriage equality is important in this country because it really gets to making sure that we're not discriminating against any family or any individual. In the question, I thought it was very effective to identify that we've also created policy in this country that diminishes equal access to benefits. In New Mexico, I worked to help pass the Domestic Partnership Act, which I reminded at the time legislators that this is really also about protecting older retirees who are living together to share expenses, and same-sex partners who ought to have the ability to have access to those benefits and, more importantly, be treated in the same way to make healthcare decisions for their loved ones.
Janice Arnold-Jones, a minute 15 for your response.
I am on record as supporting marriage between a man and a woman. That is not to say that I do not have tremendous sympathy for people who live differently. My brother died of AIDS. His partner was prevented from visiting him in the hospital. It was early on, and I thought at the time how ludicrous this is that I would have to go to the hospital and sign a paper so that my brother's significant other could visit with him. And I thought those days were over. There is never a time that disrespect is appropriate in terms of your living relationships. We all live differently now. It is true that that uncles and sisters live together because it's the way that we do things. But I think we're talking about a national policy, and that policy that furthers the health and healthy families in our nation is important. The other issue is can we today provide those same benefits under law? And I believe that we can, saving probably one issue, and that is the issue of Social Security. And I'm sure that that will be discussed. But at the end of the day, I believe the strongest family unit for our nation is still a marriage between a man and a woman.
Michelle, 30-second rebuttal.
Absolutely. Those personal views don't belong in government policy. When they're in government policy, their only aim is to discriminate against a segment of society. And here we're discriminating against same-sex partners. It has no place in government policy. We should take a stand that we have equality for all families in every undertaking at the congressional level.
Janice, would you like a 30-second rebuttal?
Absolutely. Those personal views come around the other way around. My opponent advocates for active, free availability of abortion. Quite frankly, that treads right on my First Amendment rights. Should our personal views be part of it? Absolutely. That is what you're voting on. Is how do I think, but also how do I act? Do you act with fairness to everybody? And to say that because you are a Republican that we can't listen to you, for goodness sakes, what is fair about that?
Okay. Our next question comes from James Monteleone with our media partners at the Albuquerque Journal. James.
If Congress fails to act before January, a number of major defense cuts, known as sequestration, will take effect, potentially cutting up to 20,000 jobs in New Mexico's national labs and military bases. Do you view Republicans or Democrats as more responsible for enacting that legislation? And what should be done about it?
Janice Arnold-Jones, you go first, 1:15.
Well, our current state of affairs, I think, is shared jointly by everyone, and I have mentioned many times that I think legislating, first off, by a committee was foolish. The Committee of 12 was foolish, and then to allow us to go to a de facto statement of sequestration, I think that is shared equally across all representatives and is an example of the ways that your representatives should not behave and should not legislate. Now I'm going to looking at the cuts that we are facing. Can we pull this back? Yes, we can, because we must. And part of the problem with sequestration is an unwillingness to set priorities. And those priorities clearly need to be defense, making sure that our entitlement programs are actually secure, and from there almost everything else have to be on the table. But sequestration made no differentiation, and so I believe that we've got to get in and actually fix that immediately.
Michelle Grisham, 1:15.
Well, Jim, actually, it's more like 30,000 jobs. I mean, the Ryan budget, I think, is what got us to the sequestration effort, which means we've got to do something about restoring a responsible federal budget. But the reality is these are irresponsible efforts. Now, my opponent blindly follows the Republican Ryan budget, but this is an effort where Tea Party Republicans have held Congress or the House hostage. So there's been no meaningful debate about a balanced approach that would focus on putting Americans back to work and would make meaningful efforts to save wasteful spending in government and also restore revenue by closing corporate tax loopholes and asking the wealthiest of Americans to pay their fair share.
Janice Arnold-Jones, 30 seconds.
I love those talking points, Michelle, but the truth is the Ryan proposal had nothing to do with sequestration. They were separate acts. If you were a legislator, you would understand that. Now, to say that I am blindly following anything, I am a legislator. I understand you have to have a proposal on the table. Once the proposal is there, it is open to debate and discussion, and your job is to go in and make it better and to know that the proposals that have been on the table have actually 3 times made it to the Senate, and the Senate failed to do anything. The Senate failed to hear it.
Okay,
It's a problem.
time is up. Van Grisham, 30 seconds as well.
You can call the Ryan budget anything you want. The reality is this, that unbalanced approach that turns Medicare into a voucher program, that cuts Medicaid, that cuts 20,000 jobs in New Mexico, that takes 10% out of the labs, that is the hold hostage attitude by Tea Party Republicans in Congress that has led absolutely to efforts like sequestration.
Okay, the final question from the panel in this half hour comes from Action 7 News political reporter Todd Unger. Todd.
There's a great divide in Congress right now. I think everyone would acknowledge that. Tell the voters on what specific issues you would be willing to reach across the aisle to get things done. And keep in mind, whoever's elected will be standing back on this very stage in 2 years and will have to justify how they did or did not cross party lines.
Michelle Grisham, you go first for this question.
Thank you. As a small business owner, I indicated that I understand that one of the top issues in moving the economy again is investing in small businesses, which means giving them access to working capital. I think some of the consumer protection issues aimed at the too big to fail bank, which banks, which absolutely need more accountability and transparency, and actually got us into this economic crisis, have been too strict and maybe too harsh on small businesses. I would move away from party lines to make sure that we make meaningful amendments and adjustments to make sure that small businesses and independent mortgage lenders are protected. I've always stood for the little guy. I will continue to stand for the little guy.
Janice Arnold-Jones, you also have 75 seconds for your answer.
Legislating is an attitude. You have to believe that there is no problem with a party designation. And that is how I behave. So absolutely every issue that comes to the table, if there is a good idea, if there's a way that you can make it better, you have to talk about it. Now, I served in our legislature where there were 45 Democrats and 25 Republicans. I passed legislation because I had Democrats who not only understood what I was talking about, but supported and trusted what I had to say. But my opponent wants to tell you that she is slamming a group of people, Tea Party Republicans. Don't think she's talking to them. It's an unbalanced approach, so she won't be talking about the budget. This is a pretty amazing attitude to attempt to take to Congress that is already fractured. You have to believe that absolutely everything we do is for the good of the American people, and that it is your job, regardless of party affiliation, to make it better.
30-second rebuttal opportunity.
Well, absolutely. You've got to reach across the aisle. We've got to be strategic about our solutions. I've got a 30-year career doing exactly that. But the notion that you would let a radical white right-wing group dictate against the interests of working families and for the interests of big oil companies and the wealthiest 2% is not an environment where you can negotiate strategic solutions that make a difference in the lives of the Mexicans.
You also have 30 seconds for a rebuttal.
Well, I appreciate that because my opponent has offered no options or ways to change that playing field, to say, literally, to call names and say that that is the only reason nothing is getting done. I will offer to you a single member of the Senate, Harry Reid, who has refused to take any budget off the table 3.5 years. We have got to get bigger than this. Standing around saying that we cannot solve these problems because we can't talk to one another, we've got to stop, and I bring a different voice.
All right, this is the part of the debate where we allow the candidates to ask one question of their opponent. They will have 30 seconds to ask the question, a minute 15 to respond, and the questioner will have a 30-second rebuttal opportunity. The first question is from Janice Arnold-Jones to Michelle Lujan Grisham. Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Michelle, I was wondering if you could explain to us why you decided to allow violent criminals out on early release as a member of the County Commission.
Janice, as someone who prides herself in reading legislation and understanding proposals, then you should probably know that the County Commission vote, a bipartisan vote, 4-1, was to provide additional funding to a program that's been around for years that allows our district court judges to provide increased supervision to low-risk offenders. No sex offenders or violent offenders can participate in this pretrial program. And again, 4-1 vote, the dissenting vote identified that there would be high-risk offenders and sex offenders, and he was corrected in an article in the Journal by the district court chief judge.
So you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Thank you. You know, I read that legislation too, and it's really interesting because on April 24th, this is the bill that you voted for, and I found that exactly that high-risk sex offenders were one of the first ones to actually be released. I found that to be remarkable, and as someone who has worked for years, not only working on the criminal sexual conduct code in this state, but rape crisis centers, I found that action to just be astonishing.
Now, reverse roles. You have an opportunity to ask your opponent a question. You have 30 seconds to do so.
Absolutely. Now, we've been on the path talking about how Congress is stalled, and we've got a conservative, radical Tea Party agenda. That agenda includes a constitutional amendment to prohibit a woman's right to choose in the cases of incest and rape. How will you vote on that amendment?
Minute 15 to respond.
Well, what a great question. Well, first off, I would entertain constitutional amendments very, very carefully. And because I believe that is an inappropriate constitutional amendment, regardless of the argument, my vote is no, because that is not the appropriate place to actually engage in a constitutional amendment. But further, constitutional amendments and those rules, when we tinker with our Constitution, we put our nation and our foundation at a lot of risk. And so I'm not going to go there. But your question is should there be taxpayer-paid abortions? That's the question. It's a question of who pays. And my answer is this nation for over 40 years has provided birth control, family planning, this government has provided that to women. It is available. So to engage in another constitutional amendment is, again, I think, misdirected.
30 seconds for rebuttal.
But Janice, I'm not sure where you stand, except that you would not vote for any constitutional amendments, but I'm not clear about what you're saying about protecting women's rights. You're endorsed by a extreme anti-choice organization who supports this amendment to prohibit a woman's choice in both the cases of incest and rape. If we're going to do something about unwanted pregnancies, we have to do something about providing meaningful access and protect that access to birth control and family planning.
All right, we're going to take a short break right now. We're going to be back in 90 seconds with more of our live debate between Janice Arnold-Jones and Michelle Lujan Grisham.
Thursday on Action 7 News live at 10 after an all-new scandal. When you go to the ATM, you know all the right things to stay safe. Go during the day, go with a friend, and always know who's behind you. But Target 7 is about to expose the one danger at the ATM you didn't see coming.
You certainly want to be careful.
Every time you stop to grab cash, you may be putting yourself at risk. Thursday at 10, Target 7 tells you what to look out for and what you can do to stay safe. That's coverage you can count on.
It's your voice, your vote. See the whole picture with ABC News.
And Action 7 News Commitment 2012 coverage.
From national to crucial local races, every angle in every newscast. Online at KOAT.com.
And on your phone with our new political app.
From the debates to election night.
In Washington
And here at home.
All the power of ABC News.
All the resources of Commitment 2012.
All in one place right here on Action 7 News.
Action 7 News more in the morning has more of what you need.
This morning,
More overnight news so you start the day informed. More breaking news from Sky 7. Taking off from KOAT to get to the scene faster for you. More ways to keep your family healthy with Dr. Barry Ramo and HealthBee. More of your daily forecast with First Alert Weather on the 7s. And more ways to get to work on time with Beat the Traffic. When you wake up, get more of what you need with Action 7 News more in the morning. Coverage you can count on. This is a special Commitment 2012 presentation, the first congressional district debate. Here's Action 7 News anchor and debate moderator, Doug Fernandez.
Welcome back to the KOAT Albuquerque Journal live debate between the candidates for the 1st Congressional District, Michelle Lujan Grisham and Janice Arnold-Jones. The next question for the candidates comes from Action 7 News anchor Shelley Rabando. Shelley.
As you know, President Obama has said he supports the DREAM Act. For a young, undocumented immigrant who was brought here at the age of 2 or 3 years old, what would you say to them about immigration reform and where you stand? And do you believe that they should have to go back to the country that they were born in?
Michelle Lujan Grisham, you go first, a minute 15.
I absolutely support passage of the DREAM Act and am very proud that this administration has provided an executive order to protect those young men and women who, through no choice of their own, only know this country as their own. What I would say to those young people, in addition to committing that I would get the DREAM Act passed, that it's time that this country undertakes comprehensive immigration reform. And that includes tightening up our border security, making sure that we're enforcing the policies for employers who are recruiting undocumented workers, but it's also creating a pathway to legalization for the 12 million people who are already here. The notion that we would deport and separate these families, I think, is bad policy, has created an environment where we're split states to state about what kind of effective efforts we can undertake without federal responsibility in comprehensive immigration reform. I would protect these young people and commit to helping them stay with their families.
Janice Arnold-Jones, you also have a minute 15.
The question was, do I support the DREAM Act? And actually, I don't. I don't because as it was promulgated, it was under an executive order, and I think it was inappropriate. It should have gone back to Congress because this country needs to engage in the discussion about immigration. We need to build consensus, and instead, we are dividing our country yet again. But here are the things that I think that we can do. Clearly, securing our border first is probably the first step we have to engage in. We need to make sure that the agencies involved in immigration are robust enough to actually handle the people coming in. I think it's time to raise the caps. We need the intellectual abilities of people coming from out of our country who actually many times have been educated here, but they're starting the businesses here. They are the leaders. It enriches our country. But let's get real. The real discussion here is a stalemate. We have amnesty on one side, and we have shipping people back, 12 million people back to who knows where. This is not an effective discussion. These are real people with real issues, and I believe there are other ways to begin that discussion. But I'd like to start with the children. And the children, in my opinion, should never have the sins of the parents visited upon them. But I don't like the structure of the DREAM Act.
Okay, your time is up.
Thank you.
If I allow you to finish the sentence, then I have to cut you off.
Okay.
Michelle, you have a 30-second rebuttal opportunity.
Well, absolutely. So we're talking about making sure that we protect these families. But if we don't have an executive order that protects these children, that's exactly what we're running away from. You know, when I was the Secretary of Health, a young woman in Roswell at the high school turned 18 and was reported for deportation. And she spent a weekend where she could not contact her parents, and her parents didn't know where she is. These are destructive policies that harm families and do not provide an opportunity for comprehensive immigration reform.
You also have a half-minute rebuttal opportunity.
Let me complete what I was saying. Rather than the DREAM Act that mostly focuses on colleges, it's time to start focusing in our high schools. I think any children in this situation who are in our schools should be able to make the choice to become a U.S. citizen. And before they complete their high school graduation, also complete the citizenship courses. And it wouldn't hurt our own students to have those courses available to them.
All right, our next question comes from the Albuquerque Journal political reporter James Monteleone. James, go ahead.
Thanks. Do you believe the series of new Wall Street regulations Congress has recently enacted are helping to prevent another financial collapse, or are they preventing a more robust economic recovery?
Janice Arnold-Jones, you go first this time.
Well, if you're talking about Dodd-Frank and the repeal of Glass-Steagall, it's a mixed bag. One of the problems with Dodd-Frank is the actual access to capital has literally been cut off. And it came in some of the most interesting places. The appraisers who are involved in selling houses literally can shut down a deal because of some of the rules. That is an unintended consequence of legislation that was rushed. So is it also protecting us from additional speculation at Wall Street? The jury is out in that case as well. And so, in my opinion, there are a few pieces of Dodd-Frank that have been helpful. But when you rush legislation, which we did, you often end up having to correct the unintended consequences.
Michelle Grisham, you also have a minute 15.
There's no question in this country that we have to have better oversight of our too big to fail banks in Wall Street. And the reality is our failure to provide transparency and oversight that caused the worst financial collapse since the Great Depression. The notion that we would just continue to stand blindly and allow that to occur. These too big to fail banks have the banking issues, but they also have a securities arm that we ought to be tightening our oversight and transparency. I do also agree that we've got to do something about making sure that working capital is available, that we make sure that the little guys, credit unions, community banks, that we do something about those independent lenders in this community. They're the folks that invest in small businesses like mine and make sure that you've got equitable access so that you can move your business, hire more employees, and re-engage in the economy.
Janice Arnold-Jones, you have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
You know, I was in the legislature when my colleague was a secretary, and Governor Richardson brought in Goldman Sachs into this state. And, you know, as it started, Dodd-Frank had not been passed. But before it ended, Dodd-Frank had been passed. And my experience was Dodd-Frank didn't help us a bit. When you have leaders who disregard the people and who truly aren't interested in transparency, we really don't make any forward progress.
You also have 30 seconds for
I am
rebuttal.
certainly not going to, in this debate, diminish for the viewers exactly what happened at the expense of Wall Street. And there are New Mexicans right here in this district who lost their life savings because we didn't have the right regulatory oversight, that we were failing to pay attention, that it required huge bailouts in the Bush administration, further weakening our economy. We must do everything in our power to assure that we are providing the right oversight. We can do both. We can invest in the economy, and we can make sure that our too big to fail banks cannot ever hold us hostage again.
All right, Tyler, you have the next question for the candidates, our ninth of the night. Go ahead, Todd.
You know, there's been a lot of talk recently about cutting federal funding for a lot of different things, including for Planned Parenthood. Roughly 30,000 New Mexicans rely on that organization for preventative health care. How would you vote on that specific issue?
Michelle Lewin-Grisham, you go first, a minute 15.
Thank you. I will do everything in my power to prevent any cuts to Planned Parenthood or family planning. I think most folks don't understand that 97% of the effort provided in services by Planned Parenthood are in primary care for women and their families. Now let's talk about what that care is. It's breast cancer screening and cervical cancer screening, life-saving treatments. Early detection not only means that we are saving the lives of these women, but that we're also saving healthcare costs over the long haul. We must do everything in our power to maintain that level of funding and support, and we can't minimize a woman's access also to reproductive justice services.
Janice Arnold-Jones, you also have a minute 15.
I appreciate that. You know, we've now had this question 3 times in this debate, and my answer is, you know, this is important to women, but it's not nearly as important as whether or not they can put a roof over their head, they can put gas in their cars, and that they can feed their children. And you know, the end of the story, the beginning of the story is we have to improve our economy so that there is a broader tax base to provide these services. Is it the most important services? Probably not. Probably not. And I have to correct my opponent. I don't believe that Planned Parenthood is even licensed to do breast cancer screenings. But be that as it may, what women really are concerned about is the economy. Healthcare, not that it's not important, but we will get to it. Let's work on our economy and get our economy moving so there are jobs.
30-second rebuttal.
Well, my opponent is clearly out of touch with women and their families. Unwanted pregnancies and family planning are economic issues. The notion that we would not continue to invest and support poor women to have the same primary care access and the same choices about family planning means that we're moving away from economic security for women and their families, particularly in New Mexico. And I assure you that in primary care, you absolutely assist women in and providing services for breast cancer screening and cervical cancer screening.
You also have 30 seconds for rebuttal.
You know, my opponent is really terrific at putting words in my mouth because I did not say that we were going to take away care for poor women. I don't say that at all. But I do believe that the way to provide enough resources to take care of these wonderful programs is to make sure that we have enough people working, so that we have a tax base that will work, so that more families can make their own choices.
Okay, now to our 10th question. This hour-long live debate comes from Action 7 News anchor Shelley Rabando. Shelley?
All right, this next question is about Obamacare. Do you support it, or do you think that some of it or all of it should be repealed? And how do you justify your opinions to New Mexicans who may or may not have been helped by this legislation?
Janice Arnold-Jones, you go first, a minute 15.
I'm not a fan of this piece of legislation, not because there aren't good things in it. There are. I really like being able to have my daughter, who's a law student across the country, on my insurance policy. I think it is long overdue to deal with pre-existing conditions, and I think creating more competition are all good things. But I think when you throw all of this stuff into a bill where the American citizens do not understand what's in it, it's wrong from the get-go. So those are pieces that I would keep. I would be removing many of the new taxes. The 159 new boards are problematic to me. The Independent Payment Advisory Board is truly problematic because it can, without any other oversight or redress, increase taxes, increase regulations. That process is not transparent at its core, and I reject that.
Michelle Lujan-Grisham, you also have a minute 15.
Thank you. I absolutely support the Affordable Care Act, and here are a couple of reasons why. For the first time, we are not allowing insurance companies to rate women higher for their premiums just because you're a woman. We're not allowing insurance companies to deny your access to coverage because of a pre-existing condition. We're investing in public health and community health and comprehensive services for women. I also appreciate that you can keep your young family members up to the age of 26 on your policies. The Affordable Care Act is the very first investment about providing equality in healthcare, and that's before we talk about the behavioral health and mental health investments. This is the only way that we're going to bring down healthcare costs, and in fact, for the first time, 2 years running, our health insurance premiums have gone down, and because we're requiring insurance companies to direct 85% of their revenue into direct patient care, we returned overpayments to those insurance companies right back to the consumers.
30-second rebuttal opportunity. Janice Arnold-Jones.
One of the biggest problems I do have with the Affordable Care Act is we talk about insurance. And insurance is fine and dandy as long as there are providers to actually act. Part of the problem with this legislation is the decrease in provider distributions to the point that physicians, nurse practitioners, and other nurses will literally be driven out of business and forced to go into the HMOs. There is a new piece in the Affordable Care Act called the Accountable Care Organizations.
Finish your thought real quick. I'm sorry to cut you off, but you're over your time. You also have 30 seconds for your rebuttal.
Certainly. This is an issue that's very personal to me. The consumer protections in the Affordable Care Act would have prevented, my parents near bankruptcy because my sister reached her lifetime cap, which is also now prohibited. No lifetime caps in the Affordable Care Act before she reached the age of 3. These are draconian policies. Most Americans are one step away from a bankruptcy, from a catastrophic health care issue. For the first time, this country is making sure that we're protecting our families and making sure that they have quality, affordable access to health care.
Our next question comes from political reporter from the Albuquerque Journal, James Monteleone. James, go ahead.
Capital gains, such as stock market profits, are now taxed at a lower rate than personal income, sometimes half as much. Do you believe that practice should continue?
Michelle Lujan-Grisham, you go first.
Absolutely not. It's creating an unfair standard. The Bush tax cuts for the wealthiest 2% have allowed the richest of Americans to be able to have one set of deductions for their income tax, and then for their dividends and securities, which the wealthiest of Americans are, as part of their salaries or income are not taxed at the same rate. The notion that somebody like Mitt Romney would pay 14% income tax when middle-class New Mexicans are hit so hard in this economy and are paying nearly 30%. It makes no sense. And this is policy that I would work diligently to reverse if elected to Congress.
A minute 15 for your response.
One of my priorities in Congress is to streamline our tax code to make it simple, fair, and easy to administer. But what we have currently is none of those. But having to debate what exists, the answer is they're very different rates. We have an income tax rate. It is a progressive rate. People who make less than $14,000 a year pay a significantly lower rate than people who make over $170 a year. It is a progressive rate. The reason that the capital gains rate was established where it was exactly to encourage savings. When you encourage savings, you have money to lend. Without that ability to lend money, we have businesses that have no access to capital. It was rather an eloquent system, but if we take it away, or if we do not actually redesign our tax system, I think that today the capital gains probably needs to stay where it is.
30-second rebuttal.
Disagree. Again, the way in which we were taxing the wealthiest 2% before these tax cuts, these massive tax cuts just prior to 2008, we were investing. Our economy was doing better than it is today. The notion that in and of itself is problematic is not true. What is problematic is that the Ryan budget would propose to protect the wealthiest 2%, would protect corporate corporate loopholes for big oil and gas continue to subsidize one of the most profitable industries at the expense and on the backs of working families who are already paying a much higher percentage. Thank you.
30-second rebuttal.
I appreciate the talking points again, but the question was capital gains versus personal income tax. And the purpose of capital gains was to incentivize anybody and everybody to save in one form or another. It is that savings that actually drives our economy to create more jobs and to create more available cash so small businesses can expand.
Okay, our next question comes from Action 7 News political reporter Todd Unger. Todd?
Doug, I'm curious. You're both women candidates running for Congress. There's been some talk during this campaign about a so-called war on women. Do you think there actually is a war on women?
Janice Arnold-Jones, you go first, 1:15.
I think the only war on women has been promulgated by my opponent because women are doing things. We are changing how things are operating. And as I listen to this discussion in the media about the war on women, quite frankly, I'm pretty offended. You know what? There is nothing greater for a woman than to be able to make our own decisions, even our own mistakes, to be able to create our own businesses, to raise our families with individual choice, individual responsibility. And so the war on women, to me, is misguided. The real war on women, if you're not looking, please look eastward. Look at Afghanistan. Look at the countries around the world where women are chattel, where women are literally killed simply because they are women, and the babies that are females are done away with because they have no value. The real war on women is over there. The real opportunity for women is right here.
Michelle Lujan Grisham, 1:15 as well.
So Congress has failed to do anything about getting the economy moving or any substantial policy, including immigration reform. But instead, they have put in every piece of legislation attempts to roll back the clock on women's rights. We are reducing our support for Planned Parenthood. We are reducing access to contraceptives and family planning. And in fact, even in the Senate's Transportation and Infrastructure bill, they put in an amendment defunding Planned Parenthood. We now have states that are requiring invasive procedures, and in New Mexico, we are redefining rape. This is absolutely an attempt to roll back the clock, to make sure that we're minimizing women's reproductive health care choices and women's health care options.
30-second rebuttal, Janice Arnold-Jones.
I think you should send me to Congress because there is a really clear way to fix this. I think the issue deserves an up and down vote. And one of the things we can do in Congress, and when I get there, I will introduce that piece of legislation. It's time for Congress to deal with single issue legislation. This type of question should never be in the transportation bill. The state of New Mexico has survived for 100 years with a single issue requirement in its constitution. There are almost 33 other states that have the same requirement. It's time Congress get on board.
30-second rebuttal as well.
Well, that effort would just stall Congress further. The bigger issue clearly is whether you're going to protect women's rights in this Congress. I'm clearly the only candidate on record all the way through the campaign, both primary and general, that women's rights must be protected. We will not roll back the clock. That protecting complete access to both birth control and family planning is paramount in this country. It's an issue of economic security for women.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and ask the next question about Social Security. Do you support privatization, leaving it as it is, and if you can't, fold in your answer on possibly upping the age to receive Social Security benefits? And Michelle Lujan Grisham, you go first. And because we're squeezing this one in, you have 1 minute for your answer. Please go ahead.
All right, absolutely. I would never support the privatization of Social Security. My mother lives with me because she can't afford to live on her own. Her only source of income is her Social Security. It's not enough for food and rent and her copays under Medicare. The notion that we would privatize it and potentially lose those benefits makes no sense for the aging of America, and it breaks a significant promise. We are already raising the age of eligibility in Medicare Social Security. It's now going to be 67, and it's done gradually over time. There are other ways that we can make sure that Social Security is effective and robust for the future, including raising the earnings cap.
Your response, Janice Arnold-Jones. Remember, 1 minute this time, not 1:15.
Absolutely. I'm on record as supporting Social Security and making sure that anyone 55 or over will receive the benefits that they have expected. In order to do that, we need to kickstart our economy so that there is enough revenue to make good on that promise. We also need to take one other step. any interest off of the Social Security Trust Fund being diverted someplace else in our budget needs to go back to the trust fund so we can keep this promise. But it is time. Our lifespans are growing. It's a good thing. And so raising the eligibility rate is important. And Michelle, I'm going to hand you one. I also believe that it is time to make sure that when we are contributing to Social Security, that there never be a cap.
Okay, this once again is the time we hear from the candidates as they ask each other a question. They will have 30 seconds to ask the question, a minute 15 to respond, and the questioner will have a 30-second rebuttal opportunity. This time you go first, Michelle Lujan Grisham. Ask your opponent a question, please.
And this is a race about the middle class and working families. And as the state legislator, you had significant opportunity to engage in policy making that would be effective and protect working families. In that role, you voted against repealing the food tax. You voted against the going back to school tax holiday. You voted against tax rebates to offset the high prices of gasoline. But you clearly stand with the Ryan budget, which is about protecting the wealthiest 2%, big oil and gas, and special interests. Given your record, what can you do to assure New Mexico CD1 voters that you will put working families before the interests of big oil and gas and the wealthiest 2%?
Okay, that's a long question. You have a minute 15 to go ahead and respond.
And I appreciate that question because it gets to the heart of it. You know, the food tax was passed as a way to actually protect our poorest families. It was a lie. In fact, after that bill was passed, the gross receipts tax was increased to such a point that the poorest of our families were hit the hardest. I believe in being completely transparent. What a horrible piece of tax policy. And you know, we can talk all day about how we talk about it, but when you engage in taxes that are low, broad, fair, and easy to administer, you find the lowest point of insertion. And I always found that this particular tax was just absolutely ludicrous. And the lie was compounded by the fact that anybody who received food stamps didn't pay the tax in the first place, but they got to pay a whole bunch more in gross receipts tax. What a double standard. When I get to Congress, I will be working on tax policy. It is one of my passions, and let me repeat, simple, broad, fair, easy to understand. Every American, every business deserves that.
30-second rebuttal.
New Mexico ranks 5th in the country for food security. What this means is that 25% of New Mexico's children and their parents don't know where their next meal is coming from. This was an effort that was successful by the legislature to make sure that we were investing in basic needs. The notion that you would not protect those poorest families and working New Mexicans for having access to food security, I think is an absolute abandonment of protecting the poorest individuals and those individuals in this district who need you most.
Janice Arnold-Jones, you have 30 seconds to ask your opponent a question.
Michelle, you're in several of our debates have talked about the American Jobs Act, and you're quite a fan of it. Would you please tell us 2 or 3 reasons why this is such a good piece of legislation for our country?
Minute 15 for your response.
Thank you, absolutely, because this particular piece of legislation in Congress would allow for the investment in jobs immediately, and in New Mexico. That means that we're going to invest in infrastructure jobs, like I said at the beginning of this debate, that would allow us to build hospitals and schools, that would invest in the kind of infrastructure, including upgrading potentially the grid so that we can go to a much effective energy design and plan for this country. These are the kinds of efforts, these are the kinds of investments that impact New Mexico immediately, unlike the Ryan budget, which is a loss of 20,000 jobs and a 10% cut to the labs.
You have a 30-second rebuttal opportunity, Janice Arnold-Jones.
Absolutely. You know, I appreciate your answer, but I was wondering how you reconcile that with your support for Social Security, because a significant portion of the American Jobs Act actually cuts into the payroll tax, which goes right into Social Security, further diminishing the longevity and solvency of Social Security. The other part of it is, I looked and I did read the bill, and the way that this bill is funded is by a committee to be determined later. I was just wondering why that's a good bill.
Right now, we're close to the end of our debate where both candidates will have 60 seconds for a closing statement, beginning with Republican candidate Janice Arnold-Jones. Again, you have 1 minute.
Absolutely. Thank you. You know, I love this country. My ancestors came here to find peace and liberty. My mom came to New Mexico to build a new life for us. New Mexico is my home. It is the state that I love. You know, a debate like this really does not focus on the skills needed by a good legislator in Congress. To be a good legislator, you have to listen. You have to understand the impact on all people. You have to build relationships. And you literally have to go out and represent everyone, whether you like them or not. You know, I'm not flashy. I'm not a smooth talker, but I work hard and I listen. I know New Mexicans are looking for a change in the way we do business, do politics in this country. I'm diligent. I read the bills. If these issues are important to you, I will be a good representative for you. In Congress, this is about trust. You trusted me in Santa Fe. Trust me again. Send me to Washington.
60 seconds as well, Michelle Lujan-Grisham.
Thank you. My opponent has spent much of this debate launching personal attacks instead of having the opportunity for us to focus on my real record of accomplishments. Now, this is exactly what's wrong with Congress, where it's become political and personal, instead of working on the things that really matter to New Mexicans. Now, I've talked about how my roots run deep in these communities. I understand New Mexico. More importantly, I understand New Mexicans. Here are the things that we should be doing. We should be working diligently to make sure that we're putting New Mexicans back to work. Now, as a county commissioner, I put hundreds of Mexicans back to work immediately in one of the worst economies ever. We need to protect a woman's access to health care and reproductive choices. And no question, we need to start working on immigration policies and policies that would protect our students to have high quality, affordable access to higher education. This is a race about making sure that we move the economy forward and we focus on the families that need us most. I'm Michelle Lujan-Grisham, and I respectfully ask for your vote.
And we would like to thank Michelle Lujan-Grisham and Janice Arnold-Jones for participating in this hour-long debate. We'd also like to thank our partners at the Albuquerque Journal and panelists James Monteleone, Action 7 News anchor Shelley Rabando, and Action 7 News reporter Todd Unger. Now, you can go right now to KOAT.com and give us your opinion on how you believe the candidates performed tonight. We want to hear from you. Just go to our political page where we have more information on all the candidates, the races, and tonight. Stay tuned for Action 7 News Live at 10. We will have complete analysis of tonight's debate and hear comments from some of you about how these candidates performed. The Albuquerque Journal will also have one final poll by our political analyst Brian Sanderoff next Sunday on where the candidates stack up. You want to pick up a copy of Sunday's Journal that day and watch Action 7 News for more results coming up that night. And finally, join us Tuesday, November 6th, as ABC News and Action 7 News give you all the results, local, state, and national political races. Again, thanks for watching.
This has been a special Commitment 2012 presentation from Action 7 News and the Albuquerque Journal. Coverage you can count on. Thursday on Action 7 News live at 10 after an all-new scandal. When you go to the ATM, you know all the right things to stay safe. Go during the day, go with a friend, and always know who's behind you. But Target 7 is about to expose the one danger at the ATM you didn't see coming.
You certainly want to be careful.
Every time you stop to grab cash, you may be putting yourself at risk. Thursday at 10, Target 7 tells you what to look out for and what you can do to stay safe. That's coverage you can count on.
You're moving in with me?
More trauma than they ever expected.
We're having a baby. We're having 3 babies.
Private Practice, Tuesdays at 10, 9 Central on ABC.
Coming up Monday on Action.